morning. Welcome to another Morning Java brought to you by our friends at the GetGo Cafe+Market, where my favorite thing right now is the slushies, the spiked slushies. You get them behind, the checkout counter. And when I say spiked slushies, actual alcohol in the slushies, they tape it up, you take it home. The newest flavor, they have new flavors all the time, but the newest one is Angry Orchard and Fireball, so cinnamon apple, perfect for fall. I guess we're heading into winter now, but yeah, check it out while it's still there before they switch it out for something winter. But some pretty big news related to the Penguins. So the World Junior Championship rosters were due a couple days ago, and the Penguins had both of their goalies drafted this year, Joel Blomqvist and Cal Klang. Both of them made it for their countries, Blomqvist for Finland and Klang for Sweden. And I think, and maybe a surprise to some people, Sam Poulin did not make it for Canada. He was one of the final cuts. Dave, what did you think about Poulin not making it? Were you surprised? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I was one of the people who was surprised. I mean, obviously, we didn't get to see the Team Canada selection camp, so we don't know how he performed there. Perhaps he didn't have a good camp, or maybe Canada is just so stacked that they had that many more forwards, especially wingers, left wingers, who are better than he is. That's kind of hard to imagine because he's a pretty legit prospect who, I believe that if the Penguins didn't have so many forwards on one-way contracts, he would have a legit shot at earning a spot on the roster, during the coming season. So it's hard to believe that Canada had so many young players who are better fits for their team than he is. But again, since we didn't get to see the camp, we can't really pass an accurate judgment from afar.
Yeah. So they had 22 skaters make it. 20 of those 22 skaters were first-round picks. Every single one of the forwards is a first-round pick. And I mean, that's without like Lafreniere, he's not there. It's a really, really stacked roster this year. I mean, one of the best rosters I think they've had in a while. And if you look at some of, the wingers who made it over Poulin, it's like a lot of like top 10, 15 picks from this year or last year. So, I mean, it's a really good roster. And I don't know, I think going into the camp, I think I thought he'd make it maybe as the bottom six guy, but like you said, we couldn't watch the whole camp, but looking at like the highlights from their scrimmages, I think he had like one goal in one of the early scrimmages and then didn't score after that. And just looking at where they had him on the lines, I mean, opening the camp, they had two full like inter-squad teams of like four lines each, and he was on like the fourth line or the third line to start, and you figure they got to cut those number forwards down by like half. It seemed, looking at how they went into the beginning, I thought like it would be hard for him to make it. So I guess I'm not that surprised after seeing where they had him in those lines. But I mean, is this, do you think, that big of a deal? Like, should Penguins fans care?
Not overly, unless they really plan to intensely watch the tournament, at the end of this month and then spilling into early January, wrapping up right around the time that the Penguins and other NHL clubs hope to be starting their training camps. There might be at least some fans who are tuning in to get a hockey fix. But other than that, I don't think this is a major setback in his development or necessarily an indication that his progress has plateaued or that he's regressed or anything like that. Certainly, at least for the time being, I think it's an indication that Canada has an awfully good team and will be assuming its perennial spot as one of the favorites to take the gold medal.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I just, looking at like the fan reaction, a lot of fans are like, blown away. They thought like, oh, maybe he should have been in like the top, the top six, or, at least made the roster. And, they can't believe he didn't make it. I think there for fans, there might be a tendency to like overrate the Penguins like best prospect at the time, just because they haven't had very many first round picks in a while. So when they get one, it's like, oh, this is a future superstar. And like Poulin, I mean, he's a good player. I think he's going to play in the NHL. He could play in the NHL next year. But if you look at like, you know, the guys who did make the team, he's just not you know one of the top 10 picks from this year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard any great hue and cry from inside Canada about his exclusion from the roster. So, you know, as you noted, people who follow the Penguins are going to be paying particular attention to how he fared, and perhaps giving him credit for being a better player at this point in his career than he actually is. But you know, I wouldn't read too terribly much into this, other than it, you know, it would have been nice to have a player with ties to the Penguins involved in the tournament on a daily basis, you know, just to give a little extra incentive to watch the games. But no big deal one way or the other.
You can chalk it up to the anti-French Canadian bias and just move on. All right, Dave, there's a lot of different plans, talks coming out of negotiations from the NHL and the NHLPA about what next season might look like. One of the plans that's been thrown out there as a possibility is the idea of mini hubs to get through the season. So not quite as like how the hub was in the playoffs, but a mini hub. So what it sounds like it could be is each division would have, you know, a hub at one time, and teams would go into that hub from that division, play a bunch of games at a condensed schedule, and then leave and go home, get some time off, and then, you know, go right back into it. What do you think about this idea?
Oh, I think it's an idea worth kicking around. I'd want to see the details on exactly how it's would be scheduled to work. I think you did a pretty nice job there of outlining the basic parameters as we understand them. And, you know, I think the NHL is still in a position that it was for the playoffs, where whatever they think it's going to take to be able to get games in, you know, they have to be willing to at least consider. Having all the teams in, you know, from a division in one location, even though wouldn't all be there at the same time, is a way to maybe have a little more control over the testing that players would have to make sure that they hadn't been exposed to or hadn't contracted the coronavirus. You know, there are upsides certainly, and it's not as if teams would necessarily be losing out on much in terms of home ice advantage, because, you know, I think we're proceeding on the assumption that there, at least when the season starts, there wouldn't be fans in the buildings anyway. And as Toronto and Edmonton proved in the postseason, playing in your own building doesn't necessarily guarantee you success. So, you know, if the Penguins were compelled to play their games in Columbus or, you know, New York, that's probably unlikely, but you know, I don't think it would have a profound impact, positive or negative, on how their season, at least the early part of it, would play out.
Yeah, I would just wonder how, like, I guess it would impact the quality of play otherwise, because, I mean, what it sounds like it would be is, you know, condensed games, and then they go home and they're off for, like, it sounded like maybe like a week or so, just practices. So that kind of like mini break, it's like you get like a mini like Olympic break a couple times a season. I just don't like, do you think that could be hard for, especially maybe like an older team, like getting back into it after, you know, being off no games for a week or so?
Oh, absolutely. And I also think that the quality of play early is really going to suffer from what's pretty much guaranteed to be a shorter than normal training camp. You know, it sounds like we're looking at something in the area of about 10 days for all of the teams that qualified for the postseason during the summer, and no exhibition games, which means very little time to, get things in sync, to get newcomers acclimated to their surroundings and their new line mates and special teams colleagues and things like that. So, I do think that playing a whole lot of games in just a few days and then being off for an extended period will not help the quality of play, but it won't be the only negative factor in that regard.
Yeah, and I just wonder how like the broadcast would work, because I mean the way we saw it during, like the qualifying round, like the playoffs, where there are a bunch of teams playing like that, in the same building. I mean, there were some teams with like noon starts or 4 p.m. Starts, and I don't think it wouldn't need to be that condensed in this format, because there would be less teams in one bubble. But if they're all sharing the same sheet of ice, I don't think it would be possible to have everyone play weekend games. Like some teams would probably have to play weekday, during like normal working hours, which I think could hurt when the league is already going to be struggling for any kind of revenue. Like the league, it's going to be a challenge to get interest back. So I think anything that would make the broadcast schedule weird is not ideal.
Oh yeah, it's suboptimal to be sure. But again, in a situation like this, I think you have to explore every option. And again, we don't know that this mini hub concept is one that will be adopted, but it is one that's being kicked around. And as evidenced by our conversation here, there are a whole lot of elements that will have to be considered before any final decision is rendered.
All right, and another one of those options is the idea of playing games kind of like a baseball series, where you're not in a mini hub, and teams would be traveling, so that if the Penguins are in a division with Philly, they might go to Philly and play all their games against the Flyers in Philly for the season, and then get a series and then move on, go back home or go play another team. Dave, what do you think about this idea with this plan?
I kind of like it, and I certainly understand the logic behind it. I mean, it would hold down travel expenses, and given all the revenue that teams have lost during the pandemic, they're certainly not going to be looking to spend any more money than is absolutely necessary. I think we've seen, for decades, that when teams play home and home series, where say you're having the Penguins play the Flyers in Pittsburgh on a Saturday night, and then they have a rematch the next night in Philadelphia. The bruises are still fresh. The insults that you received on the ice the night before haven't been forgotten. Players tend to have a little more of an edge. Things get a bit more feisty. And that's the kind of thing that I think tends to appeal to fans when the intensity goes up. So I certainly think it's an idea worth considering, and might even prove to be worthy of keeping when the pandemic is history. If the league does decide to experiment with that idea, and discovers that it feels the benefits outweigh any downsides, I could certainly see it becoming kind of a standard part of the schedule.
Yeah, and I mean, just to speak to like the chippiness, I mean, that's a pretty common thing in minor league hockey, just because I mean they are trying to cut down on travel. So Wilkes-Barre might play Hershey twice in the same weekend, or they might do a home and home where Hershey then Wilkes-Barre. And you do see like the second game or whatever in this series, they are more intense. If there was any like bad blood from the first game, I think we're gonna be seeing that like in the East AHL, because most of the league, like half the league is opted out. Most of the Nailers division and pretty much the Nailers are going to be playing Indy all season, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, so we could see that, and that could be good for, like we said in the last segment, the league's going to be it's going to be a challenge to get fans interested again, and because they've been without hockey for so long. So if there's a rivalry game, Penguins Capitals, and the first game was chippy, fans are going to want to tune in to see what happens in the next game the next day. So I think that could be good for interest.
Yeah, and perhaps when you get back to normal hockey, if such a thing still exists, you wouldn't necessarily have to play on back-to-back nights or anything. You could play in Washington on Friday night and then have the Capitals here on Sunday instead of Saturday. You could certainly have a little flexibility with scheduling, but I think it's a concept that actually could have some appeal, and it's worth
Yeah,
worth investigating at the very least.
Yeah, and for travel wise, probably not as big of an issue with the teams in the East, but out West, like I'm reminded, I think it was like last season or 2 seasons ago, Jonathan Toews actually brought this up as an idea that they could keep the league could go into. I mean, obviously this is pre-pandemic. He suggested the idea of baseball like series just because out West travel can be rough. So I think what Toews said was like, if like the Blackhawks are going to play San Jose, you go there, play all your games against San Jose, so you don't have to go back. So I mean, something like that, especially out West, I mean, it would definitely make it easier for the guys out there beyond the pandemic.
Yeah, that's fine, and I'm sure there's a downside. Perhaps the ticket buying public doesn't want to see the same team twice in 2 nights or 3 nights. I guess there'd have to be some research done on that. But, on a superficial basis, at least for now, it seems to me that the positives outweigh the negatives and make this an idea that is worth at least investigating.